Simon Says is a simple game with simple rules. You learn quickly to do what Simon says or you're out of the game. But when Simon is an international gangster and he says smuggle heroin, disobeying his instructions can have fatal consequences.
We received a call to say that an attempted abduction had occurred at Regal Court in Glen Waverley and that the witness had seen an Asian male begging for his life and was down on his knees crying and obviously was in a distressed state.
The second witness saw the two men then put the man into the boot of the car and then drove out of Regal Court. Fortunately for the police, the witness was able to record the registration number of the car and those details were passed on to the police.
BK to all units in the Glen Waverley area. The vehicle we're looking for in relation to a possible abduction is Foxtrot Romeo November 929. Stand by, I'll get the usuals.
As police at the scene waited for the usuals, being the ownership of the car, they took a closer look at where this young Asian male had been abducted.
Glen Waverley, 7, I've come across a gentleman's coat in the driveway, probably or possibly the address from where the victims come from. I've also found a cat nearby, so I'd definitely say the altercation occurred in the driveway at this address.
And we also noticed there was a car in the driveway and the vehicle was unlocked, so we thought this was the victim's car. We door knocked the house and there was no one home and the house was locked and secured. So we checked the vehicle for registration to establish a name to the car to see whether it was connected to the house.
November Romeo Kilo 353. It should be a 96 Toyota Lexus sedan silver.
It was the right vehicle, but the registered owner, 22-year-old Anh Tuan, lived elsewhere.
408, could you attend that address, please? Make some inquiries.
When police first went to the registered owner's house of the Lexan, they met Tao, who was Lee's fiancée.
The two were expecting their first child and had bought this house. The house where the car was parked was being rented by them while renovations were underway.
Tao told police that she and Lee had been awaiting an electrician to come there to give them a quote. When the electrician failed to show up, Lee drove the Lexan back to Regal Court, where he had the phone number for the electrician. Tao said she was concerned that he hadn't come back, that she'd attempted to contact him and was unsuccessful.
408, any suggestions from the young lady as to why this may have occurred?
Before I just stand by, she's actually made a phone call to her mother, who she says may have some knowledge of it. She hasn't been able to tell us why. I'll just get back in a sec.
Roger.
All right, we've got the girlfriend on the phone to the victim's mother, who says she may know something about the reason this boat's been taken. She refused to discuss the reasons on the phone.
So arrangements were made for her to come down to the Glen Waverley police station.
Meanwhile, police had discovered the car used in the abduction had been bought at a car yard only 10 days before. It had been sold to an 18-year-old by the name of Hoy.
When we went to the address, Mrs. Vang, Hoy's mother, was home. Hoy was at school and he had the car in his possession at the school. We went to the school and spoke to Hoy and he had told us that the car had been stolen 3 days prior. Hoy had not reported the car being stolen to the police. He thought that he would report it after school on this particular day that we were there.
As a result, both Hoy and his mother, Mrs. Van, were asked to come to the police station to give statements about the missing car. In another room, police were interviewing the kidnapped victim's mother, Mrs. Ha, and his fiancée.
And when was the last time you saw your son?
Mrs. Ha was very calm throughout the situation, considering that her son was at risk. She was obviously trying to assist the police as much as she could in locating her son.
Mrs. Ha said that she believed she knew who was responsible for the kidnapping of her son Lee. And it was an Asian businessman, a man by the name of Phuc, that she'd met some months earlier. Phuc was based in Hong Kong Mrs. Howard was a clothing importer, and he had approached her asking her to use her business as a front or as a means of him importing heroin into the country. She told Fuchs she didn't want any part of it, and she refused to assist him in any way.
When Mrs. Ha refused to go into partnership with Fuchs, he then made a demand for $400,000. The demand was made on the basis that he had disclosed to her what his illegal activities were, thereby jeopardising any future importations into Australia. He demanded that Mrs. Ha then pay him that $400,000 by way of restitution. When she refused, over several months there was threats being made by Fuchs that there would be harm fall upon Mrs. Ha's family should she not pay the money.
It was apparent that Fuchs' threat had come true, and when police entered the premises he rented, they discovered a clock was ticking.
When they went back to the house, they found that the house had been ransacked. But while they're there, they also found a note. She said it was in Lee's handwriting. It was written in Vietnamese. It basically said that he'd gone with Fuchs' people and to tell his mother that she had 72 hours to pay the money that Fuchs was asking for.
We know that it's a live ticking bomb. The fuse has been lit, and it's up to us to stop that detonation occurring and to find the person alive.
22-year-old Anh Tuan had been kidnapped, seemingly because his mother had refused to import heroin and then refused to pay $400,000 for the privilege of turning the offer down. She was currently in the police station making a call to Hong Kong, to the person who had ordered her son's abduction, Truong Hong Phuc.
When she spoke to Fuchs again reinstated his demand for the money to be paid over, and if the money wasn't paid, he suggested that there would be harm to Lee. It wasn't play school, this was a genuine kidnapping with real concerns for the well-being and the welfare of Lee.
If his criminal record was any indication, Phuc meant business. When police here contacted Hong Kong authorities, they learned he'd been jailed for manslaughter and was a major player in the international drug trade. But it was a connection here in Australia that was of great interest in the investigation.
When we spoke to Mrs. Ha about Fuchs and how she first met him, she told police that Fuchs was actually introduced to her through Mrs. Van. Fuchs was actually Mrs. Van's brother. And Mrs. Van is the mother of Hoy, the registered owner of the Camry that was used in the kidnapping.
Mrs. Van and her son were currently giving statements about the missing car that they told police had been stolen.
We were able to identify that some 3 days prior to the kidnapping, the vehicle had been intercepted on the Hume Highway heading towards New South Wales.
And it was intercepted by police again in Goulburn for another traffic infringement. The driver was spoken to by police, his details were obtained. The driver was identified as a person by the name of Long, who gave an address in Victoria. We'd made inquiries at the address that he'd given. He wasn't anywhere to be found. So surveillance was placed on his premises and other areas that he was known to frequent.
Police were also keeping an eye on Mrs. Van's place. Both had links to the car, and in turn to the kidnapping. And Mrs. Van was the sister of the man who had ordered Lee to be taken. Lee was somewhere, and 24 hours had passed.
Over the first 48 hours, there would have been something like 6 or 7 phone calls between Mrs. Ha and Fuchs. And on each occasion, the primary objective of the phone call was to attempt to have Fuchs acknowledge that he was involved in the kidnapping in some way and to have some sort of communication with Lee to confirm that he was alive. Fuchs adamantly refused to discuss anything to do with Lee and maintained that the only reason he was contacting Mrs. Ha was that he was owed a debt of $400,000 and that he wanted that money repaid.
Police desperately needed to find Lee before the deadline expired. They needed to identify the actual kidnappers, and they needed to find Fuchs.
Mrs. Ha mentioned on the first night to police that about a month earlier she'd got a fax from Fuchs where it nominated 4 different bank accounts in Hong Kong, and they were the bank accounts that he wanted her to put the $400,000 into.
As police didn't know where Phuc was currently staying, they hoped the details on the fax would provide that information. But it would take time.
That evening there was a call made from Mrs Ha to Phuc. We asked that Mrs Ha ask for a further extension on the 72-hour deadline. Phuc agreed to a 24-hour extension until midday the following day.
The time had allowed the Hong Kong authorities to establish the locations of the account holders. Each was put under surveillance, just as the ones in Australia had been. But the extension time had now come and gone, and Phuc had made no contact. Then, 2.5 hours later, he called.
Phuc indicated that the meeting would take place in the vicinity of the Spencer Street railway station the next day. The surveillance people, the special operations group, they were all briefed. The area had to be looked at for the best possible positions for everyone to be put into place.
On that next day, Mrs. Ha awaited specific instructions.
Mrs. Ha was obviously going through a pretty stressful time, but the way she conducted herself, she was just amazing. She was very strong and seemed fairly composed for what she was faced with.
The investigators were then alerted by surveillance officers that 4 men had arrived near the drop-off point.
They weren't going about normal business of anyone coming and going from the railway station. They seemed like they were waiting for something to happen. Just their mannerisms and their movements and their appearance, that they were identified pretty quickly.
At one stage, one was seen to be making a call on a mobile phone. Simultaneously, Mrs. Ha had just received a phone call.
This time the call wasn't from Phuc. A different voice told her that she needed to go to a particular area at the Spencer Street station and to expect someone to collect the money. She was told to come alone.
If the person that was giving directions to Mrs. Ha in fact was one of the collectors at the railway station, then that person would have intimate knowledge as to the whereabouts of Lee.
She was put into a taxi. The taxi was driven by a member of the police force for her safety, obviously, and he was going to take her down to the railway station where the exchange was going to take place.
After a harrowing 5 days and no phone contact with her kidnapped son, Mrs. Ha was about to exchange $400,000 for his safe return.
Phuc told Mrs. Ha that he was sending down a pawn, as he referred to him, to collect the money, and that within 2 hours of that occurring, she would get a further phone call that would give her the location of her son.
That was the afternoon before. Now, residences both here and overseas were ready to be raided and searched, and Special Operations Group members were ready for the handover.
Once an exchange was made, the 4 that had been identified at the railway station, they'd be kept under surveillance in the hope that they would then take us back to a premises or some sort of contact either with Phuc or with Lee or with any of the kidnappers, any of the people involved in the whole situation.
But that hope was quickly dashed.
One of the males did actually see some of the covert arrest crews in position, and pretty much immediately he was seen to get onto a phone, and he could have been making contact with Phuc or with any of the kidnappers. So the arrest crews were given the instruction to arrest the males straight away. And at that same time, all the various crews that were maintaining surveillance on the addresses in Victoria and also in Hong Kong were notified to execute search warrants.
As this unfolded, Mrs. Ha received a phone call.
The caller was unhappy with Mrs. Ha, and they didn't think Mrs. Ha was playing the game properly. She was further instructed to make a phone call within an hour to receive further instructions.
But when she called Phuc's number, it continually went to voicemail.
The main priority was Lee's whereabouts and whether the events of that day had any effect on his welfare.
At this stage, the police had in custody the 4 men who were now being questioned.
They basically gave an account of being asked to collect some money, and they were going to receive an amount of cash, I think it was $5,000, just for collecting the money from a lady. But they weren't giving any other indication that they had any other connection with the kidnapping or any other knowledge of Phuc or Lee's whereabouts. And as a result of that, they were released.
The raids on the houses here in Australia weren't promising either. No evidence, no Lee. But in Hong Kong, where 2 men were arrested, there was a definite link to the kidnapping.
In the execution of the search warrants in Hong Kong, we were able to locate the original fax that was forwarded to Mrs. Ha with the demand, plus the fax machine itself.
More importantly, there was a suggestion that Phuc himself may have been there.
There was an address book that contained Mrs. Van's details from Clayton, the mother of Hoy, the registered owner of the Camry that was used in the kidnapping. So there's a few items there that gave a direct link with Phuc.
Neither police nor the distraught family have heard from the kidnappers for more than 10 days. Detectives now hold grave fears for Tuan Lee's safety.
They have principals overseas that have organised and orchestrated the kidnapping. They've obtained the services of local people here in Victoria to carry out the actual kidnapping.
In an effort to confirm the safety of Lee and to attempt to secure his release, a media conference was conducted where Tao and Mrs. Ha pleaded for the safe return of their son Lee.
The distraught girlfriend and the mother of the kidnapped man are too frightened to show their faces, but pleaded for 22-year-old Tuan Ann Lee's safe return.
If you got my fiancé, can you please release him for me? Because I'm pregnant. I'm a young lady, and I really need my husband's help.
Fighting back tears, Mr. Lee's mother spoke through an interpreter.
Please release my son to be back safely with his family. My son is innocent.
But the only outcome was the discovery of the car used in the abduction. It was found locked and neatly parked, only streets away from the scene of the crime.
The first priority was to get the car out to our forensic science laboratory in the hope that it could shed any sort of evidence, whether it be fingerprints, DNA, samples of the clothing, hair, anything at all from any part of the car. They didn't find anything in the car. One thing they found was traces of some type of powder that were cleaning compound, so it was pretty apparent that the car had been pretty thoroughly cleaned before it had been left in Seaford. It was a bit disappointing to find the car in that state, but you'd almost expect that that was going to be the case. Either the car was found in that state or it was found a shell somewhere. We arranged for Hoy to come back in to give us an indication as to what may have been different with the car or may have been missing from the car, and he told us that he believed that there was a P plate, a floor mat and a street directory missing from the car. And then almost a month to the day after the car had been found, we got a phone call from a member from the homicide squad to say that Lee's body had been found in a drain in Noble Park.
The male person was found wearing clothing that was similar to that worn by Mr. Lee when he was kidnapped, and it was apparent that he had tattoos that were consistent with those that Mr. Lee had.
Police divers arrived at the Noble Park drain today, scouring a 2-kilometre stretch near where a man's body was discovered late yesterday. It was partly decomposed. Detectives believe it had been in the drain at least a few days. School children spotted it through an open grate. Search and rescue officers began an arduous line search, carefully combing surrounding grassland for any clue.
At the post-mortem, it was established that the cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the head. There was an X-ray of the skull which identified the .22 round inside the skull. Ballistics were able to establish that the firearm was discharged only a short distance from his head, execution style.
It was a pretty cold crime with no personal attachment. Almost look at it as it was like a business transaction.
The case had now gone from one of trying to find Lee alive to trying to find his murderers. And one piece of forensic evidence that was not relevant at the time of his kidnapping would now become a vital clue in tracking them down.
Police have confirmed that a body found in a drain in Noble Park was that of a man kidnapped from outside his Glen Waverley home 6 weeks ago.
Divers searched through more than a kilometre of drain over the weekend following the discovery of Mr Lee's body. Homicide detectives say the post-mortem results show the body was dumped down this grate into the underground drainage system somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks ago.
It certainly was consistent with the time that he'd been kidnapped. He may have only been alive for 2 or 3 days from the kidnapping to when he was put in the drain.
22-year-old Tuan and Lee was shot through the head in an execution-style killing.
We have a kidnapping that has gone horribly wrong to the extent that after the kidnappers have not had their demands met, they have killed their victim.
Once the homicide squad became involved, it was our role to look at all the evidence that was available to see if any person could be incriminated with the kidnapping and the murder. I went back to the photos of the initial crime scene. I identified a Marlboro baseball cap which was located on the footpath of Mr Lee's address.
We knew that the cap didn't belong to Lee, and through a process of elimination we were able to determine that it wasn't owned by any of the residents of the court. So we had a strong inference that it had been dropped by the kidnappers. The witnesses that observed the kidnapping had seen Lee struggling with the kidnappers before he was bundled into the boot.
There were 2 men beating another man in the stomach, and then a car with the boot open reversed back into the court, and the man that was being hit started crying. He was calling out, "Help, help."
It was quite probable that the cap had been knocked off in the struggle and left at the scene by the kidnappers.
The fact that the cap was found was important to us because with any baseball cap or cap that's worn, there's obviously could be hair follicles located inside the cap, or sweat can be found on the brim of the cap. That DNA could be matched to the DNA of certain individuals who might be suspected of being involved in the crime.
And as a result of examination of the Marlboro cap, 3 separate DNA profiles were identified on the band inside the cap.
But those profiles didn't match any on the police database, and detectives hoped another avenue of inquiry would give them a lead.
I made contact with the brand manager of Marlboro in Australia. He was able to inform me that the cap was an original Marlboro product and that it could only be obtained as a gift when you purchased 2 cartons of Marlboro cigarettes at duty-free shops at American airports.
$90,000 of these caps had been given away. And finding the person or persons who had worn one of them 12,000 kilometres away here in Melbourne was almost impossible. So detectives put that line of inquiry to one side and looked for further clues to the kidnappers closer to home.
It was important to investigators to find the house where Lee had been held hostage, because every contact leaves us traces, and we were hopeful to get some traces of the kidnappers at the house.
Police believed that it was likely that Lee was held somewhere near where his body had been initially dumped into the drainage system.
Basically, at different stages along the drainage system, there is a steel grate, and we were looking for a grate that had been removed or replaced or broken, and that's where Mr Lee could have been put into the drainage system, but all of the drains seemed to be intact. So we then went to real estate agencies in the Springvale area to ascertain whether there was any premises who had been rented or leased for a short period of time which would be consistent with what the kidnappers would be looking for. And we were lucky enough to find in one real estate agency that Mrs Van had attended and rented a property approximately a month prior to the kidnapping. She only wanted the premises for a short period of time and broke the lease after a month, which was consistent with the times when Mr Lee went missing and after he was killed.
While the renting of the property didn't implicate Mrs Van in the kidnapping, the fact that she was the sister of Fook, their prime suspect, meant this information could not be ignored, just as the activities at the house were not ignored by neighbours.
Not only had neighbours observed men of age and appearance bringing mattresses into the premises, they also observed a car similar in description to that used by the kidnappers coming and going from the premises. We obtained a search warrant for the premises to look for evidence of the kidnapping. We were obviously hoping to find anything whatsoever to support the fact that Mr Lee had been held at the premises. Upon entering the house, the first thing we saw was the curtains had been drawn and were held together with clothing pegs, which in itself appeared to be suspicious. Searching the bathroom, there was a mass of dark coloured hair in the shower. I was hopeful that was the deceased's hair. There was also some plastic cable ties which can be used as handcuffs. We were hoping that there may be DNA or hair located on those cable ties which would prove that they'd been worn as handcuffs by Mr Lee. However, those tests proved inconclusive.
So too were those done on the hair found in the shower. But in the shower was another item, a discarded cigarette butt.
The DNA found extracted from that cigarette butt was consistent with one of the strains of DNA that was located on the cap that was found at Mr Lee's address. So that indicated that whoever had smoked the cigarette potentially may have worn that cap.
And there was a street directory, similar to the one reported missing from the car used in the kidnapping.
When we searched the street directory, the scene of the kidnapping had been circled by someone.
Of all the streets in the street directory to be circled was Regal Court. This suggested to us that we're on the money.
The detectives were gathering vital clues, but they still had no killer. But that was about to change. Further forensic evidence was about to bring them face to face with a man known as the executioner.
Police had gleaned evidence from the place Lee had been kidnapped from and the likely place he had been kept before being killed. But they were no nearer to finding those who had shot him. But because Mrs. Ha knew the mobile phone number that Phuc had been using during his negotiations with her before and after the kidnapping, police began to track its movements. They were hopeful the records would lead them to those who undertook his dirty work.
It was apparent that he'd been calling a number of motels and hotels in the Sydney area. The Lansdowne motel came up a lot. There was a significant number of calls to that motel on the 3rd of May, which was only a couple of days after the kidnapping. So we went through every guest registration card on the 3rd of May, and there were two people who were of particular interest to us. One identified himself on the guest registration card as Michael Nguyen and provided an American address. The other was Tuan, who provided an address in Los Angeles and a telephone number on his guest registration card.
The timing and arrival of these guests seemed more than a coincidence when police looked at the evidence that had been found in the Hong Kong raids.
One of the exhibits found in Hong Kong was a novel titled Until Proven Guilty. When we searched through the pages of the book, we found the telephone number of the Lansdowne Motel, and not only the telephone number, but the number 128 was written next to that number, which in fact was the room number that Tuan was staying in at the Lansdowne Motel. Adjacent to that page was the home telephone number in America for Tuan. What it gave police was fantastic evidence to support our claims that Phuc not only knew Tuan, but knew that he was staying in that motel and that particular room at the time directly after the kidnapping. And the fact that the people staying were Vietnamese people who claimed to be from America was very significant to us, because the cap found at the crime scene could only be obtained from duty-free outlets in America, and these two people claimed to be from America.
When checks were done on the two, Michael Nguyen and his details were false. Tuan, on the other hand, was who he claimed.
Upon identifying that Tuan was a real person, we ascertained that he departed America on the 20th of April and he arrived in Australia 6 days before the kidnapping took place. We then asked the Federal Police member in the States to check all duty-free outlets at Los Angeles International Airport to ascertain whether any purchase of Marlboro cigarettes had been made by our target, Tuan. When you buy any duty-free items in America, you have to produce your passport at the time of the purchase. There was no purchases made by Tuan of cigarettes or any other duty-free items.
But on the flight manifest, it was interesting because a purchaser with a Vietnamese name had purchased some cigarettes and a cap. That person was sitting next to Bui Tuan. It seemed more likely to us that the purchaser of the cigarettes and the cap had given Tuan the cap. Interesting to us was the purchaser of the cigarettes, the Vietnamese man, was also the same man that had been caught up in the raids in Hong Kong by the Royal Hong Kong Police. A very, very strong link now to us.
Oh, it was one of the turning points in the investigation. It was the first real break we'd had in the whole time that we'd been investigating the case. It really turned the corner for us that we could physically identify one of the kidnappers. At that stage, we knew Phuc was involved, but we had no idea who physically was responsible for his kidnapping, and now we had fairly clear evidence that Bui Tuan was more than likely one of the kidnappers involved.
To test that theory, Bui Tuan was found in Los Angeles and brought into a sheriff's office over other matters, and a DNA sample was covertly taken.
And we were able to use that sample against the sample that we took out of the band of the hat. As a result, we were able to determine that Bui Tuan's DNA was on the band of the cap.
The news was encouraging, but extradition proceedings would be kept on hold. Police still didn't know where Phuc was, and they needed to discover the true identity of Bui Tuan's travelling companion.
We ascertained that Phuc had rung the Marco Polo motor inn, which is also in Sydney. And it was from there that we identified that Michael Nguyen had stayed there 4 days before the kidnapping. And when he booked into the motel and completed the guest registration card, he wrote down his name, Michael Nguyen, an address from Melbourne, and also that he was with a vehicle, FRN 929, which was the registration number of the car used in the kidnapping.
That car and its driver, Long, had been pulled over for speeding earlier on that same day as it travelled from Melbourne to Sydney.
It was fantastic for us because we had not only Long associated with that vehicle, we now had Michael Nguyen positively with that vehicle that was used in the kidnapping 4 days later.
The whereabouts of Long was unknown, and police still didn't know the true identity of Michael Nguyen to even begin looking for him. But when a check of that name was made with the Immigration Department, they had luck. A Michael Nguyen had been arrested on leaving Australia.
He had in excess of $10,000 Australian currency and a small vial containing heroin in his possession. He was interviewed, photographed, fingerprinted and processed. He received a fine for $500 and was put on the next plane to Vietnam. We sent the fingerprints and photograph to America for identification by the law enforcement agencies in that country, and it was then established that Michael Nguyen was a false name and Michael Nguyen was in fact Bui Tai Hu, the elder brother of Bui Tuan.
And his criminal pedigree was extensive, culminating in murder.
Bui Hu was known as the executioner. He was a hitman who basically travels the world to kill people.
And as the police were about to discover, he had no qualms in doing it.
So you got no idea where he was going, so to speak? Well, they don't, whatever. Do whatever.
Detectives investigating the kidnap and murder of Anh Tuan had identified two suspects who were connected to evidence found at the place he was abducted.
We knew that Bui Hu was connected to the car that was used in the kidnapping. His brother, Bui Tuan, was connected to the cap that was found at the kidnapping scene, and both of them had been contacted by Phuc while they were in Sydney at the motel.
Now Phuc's phone records would place them in Melbourne. He had called one mobile number 15 times during the day of the kidnapping and in the 3 days following.
Upon tracking the phone's movement, we were able to ascertain that it was making calls from the location of the kidnapping, from the location where the deceased was held prisoner, and also it was making calls from the motel, or the area of the motel, where the Bui brothers were staying after the kidnapping. It was apparent to us that it could only have been the Bui brothers that were using that phone. So from starting with just a few pieces of the jigsaw, we now had a substantial part of the puzzle solved. In our opinion, it was clear that Phuc was calling the shots from Hong Kong. Bui Tai Hu was the executioner of that group, and that he'd asked his brother, Anh Tuan, to assist him, and that Long was the driver of the kidnapped vehicle, and that he was chauffeuring the two Americans around Australia.
On the day of the kidnapping, police believe that Long dropped off his American companions at Lee's rental place sometime before midday.
The two Americans have secreted themselves inside the premises, while Long has then driven to a neighbouring suburb and waited for further instructions.
According to phone records, at 12:01, the buoys called Long's mobile. Police believed this was to alert him that Lee had just arrived home.
They have then forced him to write the ransom note. Shortly after that, the Bui brothers have then contacted Long and instructed him to return to the address. A struggle has then taken place. The cap has come off and they've then forced him into the boot. We presume that they drove straight to the kidnapping house, and there he was held against his will. We believe that 4 days after Mr. Lee was kidnapped, they shot him in the head.
On that fourth day, phone records put the Bui brothers at Melbourne Airport. It was 2:25 p.m. and they were about to fly to Sydney. Only 15 minutes later, Phuc called Lee's mother. Even though Lee was dead, he was still demanding his money.
So we weren't dealing with nice people here. We were dealing with very hardened, calculated criminals who all they're worried about is lining their own pockets.
The next day, the handover was scheduled. Phuc escaped the raids in Hong Kong, and in the days following, both the Bui brothers and Long left Australia.
At this stage, we had sufficient evidence to charge the main players with kidnapping and murder. Then we had even a bigger task of finding where they were. And even though the world's shrinking every day, it's very easy to hide with false passports.
It had taken the team over a year to get to this point, and it would be another year before their suspects began to emerge. Bui Hu, the executioner, was found in Vietnam. He himself was facing the firing squad over his involvement in a large-scale drug importation and exportation racket.
I flew to Vietnam and I interviewed him for a full day whilst he was on death row.
You know, anything whatsoever in relation to kidnapping of Leon Tuan? You know, anything that be murder of Leon Tuan? No. Who do you think is responsible for this man's kidnapping and murder? You all there? Over there meaning Melbourne, in Melbourne. And were these people working on behalf of you? They will pay you back. They will pay you back. But who? Is that what you're saying? Yes. I put it to you that you were part of an international pyramid syndicate controlled by Phuc. He instructed you to travel to Australia in company with your brother, who was Anh Tuan. No. And I put it to you that when Leon Tuan has returned home, you go there, assaulted him, put him in the boot of the car, and then travelled to Glendale Road and Springvale. There this man was held captive for a number of days, prior to you killing him with a .22 firearm. Really? And then travelled to Sydney to escape the police. Sounds really interesting. Do you know what happened to the boy after he was killed? No. Have you read the papers? I couldn't hear that. So you've got no idea of how he was dumped, so to speak? Well, they dumped him, whatever. You will do whatever.
During the interview, Bui Hu had smoked. The cigarette butts were collected and his DNA was found next to that of his brother's on the baseball cap.
Had Bowie provided information and evidence for us and confessed to his role in the kidnapping and murder, it would have saved his life. He could have been transported to Australia and faced life in jail and potentially been free in 25 years or less. However, he believed the threat to his family was way too great to incriminate Phuc, and he chose to face a firing squad in Vietnam.
However, the man who had such power over people's actions had been found. Phuc had threatened to kill a witness in a murder trial in London. And when police checked the alias he'd been using, a red alert from the Victorian police popped up.
I got a phone call at 3 a.m. from a Scotland Yard detective to say, "We know where your man is." And I just remember how relieved I felt. Phuc was arrested climbing out the bathroom window in London by the flying squad. You know, I was extremely happy that Phuc was in custody, but I guess I was really disappointed I wasn't in England putting the handcuffs on Phuc myself.
But following extradition proceedings, Steve Trigard got his wish.
We were about to take off at Heathrow. You know, I remember sitting next to him, handcuffed, thinking how I wish everyone that had worked on this job was sitting on that plane. You know, he was a big fish, but we eventually nabbed him.
Anh Tuan, the younger brother of the man executed, was also arrested. But the evidence against him wasn't enough to secure his extradition from the United States. Long, the driver, was caught in Hong Kong, but charges against him were dropped. Phuc's sister, Mrs. Van, went to trial alongside her brother for the kidnap and murder of Anh Tuan. A decision could not be made by the jury in regard to her, and further charges were not pursued. But her brother, Phuc, was found guilty. He received life imprisonment and will not be eligible for parole until 2024.
How can you describe a person who's taken the life of a young man who's barely 21 in order to continue on in his trade of heroin importation, which in itself leads to hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths?
It was an amazing ride, a roller coaster ride, to get to the stage where we're sitting in court hearing those wonderful words, guilty. It was the best day of my career. But you know what the moral of the story is? Every dog has his day.
The Australian Federal Police had been given a tip that a large amount of narcotics was about to enter our shores. They had no idea where or when it would happen, but they did know if it wasn't stopped, a massive quantity of heroin would hit the streets, resulting in other crimes and possibly deaths. The only intelligence they had was that a Mr. Teng had arrived in town.
Once we received the information in relation to Teng, our team started checks into his background, into his arrival in Australia, and into his location in Melbourne at the time.
The task for the surveillance branch was to follow Mr. Teng around to see exactly what he did, who he met, where he went.
Well, I'm videoing a guy who looks very much like him, standing near the crossing.
Our first point of actually seeing Teng was in and around the Crown Casino in Melbourne.
He's standing near the crossing smoking a cigarette. Yep, that's our man.
And then we discovered he was using a Tarago van to drive around Melbourne. Some checks that were carried out determined the car had been hired from Europe Car in Geelong, a fair way from Melbourne itself, not somewhere where a tourist would usually go to hire a car when there's so many car rental places around Melbourne. Such a large vehicle for one person seemed interesting.
For 3 days, the surveillance team followed Mr. Teng and the van back and forth from Melbourne to Geelong.
Still on the phone smoking, just swiveled around a bit so he's facing away from the water.
His movements around the shoreline and the piers around Geelong, it was almost as if he was surveying the area, possibly even familiarising himself with certain aspects of the geography of the area.
Although he was staying at Crown Casino, and I guess you could say he was gambling of an evening, certainly his activities didn't fit with the normal activities of tourists.
While surveillance was kept on Mr. Teng, Federal agents took a chance and spoke with the manager of the company from where the van had been rented. It paid off. Their target had inquired about renting another car.
Mr Teng stated that he wanted a four-wheel drive. His family was coming out here and he needed it for luggage, which we, at that stage, believed was false. We thought he was going to put something sizable in the boot there and it wasn't going to be luggage.
The idea of boot space, if it was narcotics, what quantity are we looking at? We must be looking at a reasonable size importation, if in fact that was what he intended to do.
Europcar Geelong didn't have a four-wheel drive available, so the AFP actually rented a four-wheel drive on their behalf and had it set up ready for Teng to rent from Europcar.
The next day, the four-wheel drive with listening devices was delivered.
Europcar, on our behalf, contacted Teng, stating they'd just come across a four-wheel drive that was available for his rental, and that allowed us to get Teng back to the office so we could take some surveillance of him and commence our monitoring of his movements and any conversations that he may have. He looked at the four-wheel drive, looked again at the Tarago, and decided there wasn't enough room in the four-wheel drive itself for what he wanted it for.
When you have these operations, things seem to go smoothly for a period of time. All of a sudden, it's Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. And that's what makes these operations difficult, trying to control the movements of somebody that has no idea they're being looked at, but often they just go off and do their own thing as they want.
My boss now, he's going to kill me because I had to bring it down from Melbourne. It cost me money. Doesn't matter.
However, the manager at Europcar was able to walk out and actually look at the two vehicles in their discussions. He noticed another male in the Tarago van with Teng, another Asian male, and he also noticed in the back of the Tarago some luggage, and the details on one of the luggage related to a person by the name of Lamb.
Police began checks on this person, Lamb, but their target was always Mr Teng. Wherever he went, they went, and he, along with this Mr Lamb, were now heading further round the coast to the surfside city of Lorne.
Time is 4:51 on the 11th of April 2003. Subject having a cigarette out the front. His associate in the driver's side of the Tarago, yet to exit the vehicle.
Teng went from Europcar Geelong to Lorne and made inquiries at a real estate agency.
Real estate agent Smythe.
After his conversations were completed and he'd left the area, one of our investigators approached the real estate agency and, again making a judgment call, discussed his conversations with them about renting a property.
Subject entering vehicle. Mr Teng made inquiries, fairly solid inquiries about rental premises up on the hill in Lorne there, and my first impression personally was that something would be happening in the next few days. As it turned out, he transited back to Geelong and back to Melbourne. However, he had made inquiries in Geelong also, so to me it felt like he was basically hedging his bets.
With Teng back in Melbourne and spending the night at the blackjack tables, police were able to install a listening device into his van. The chess game, as federal police saw this operation, was underway. And if they wanted to win the game, they needed to be one step ahead of his every move.
Mr Kiem Fah Teng had spent the last 2 weeks travelling to the south coast of Victoria, sometimes alone, and at other times in the company of a man police believed was a Mr Lamb. But federal agents didn't believe their interest in the coast was to find a place to go fishing, but a place where a large shipment of narcotics could be dropped off. To find out where and when, federal agents were able to install listening devices into the van he had already hired.
However, Teng decided the next day he'd actually wander on foot around the Melbourne Central Business District. So the AFP had to fall back to our physical surveillance of Teng.
Yeah, he's leaning up against the wall and he's looking around a fair bit, and he just looked down to his watch on his right wrist.
1 minute later, the reason was clear.
Our man's meeting with a UI just underneath the walk bridge.
He was seen to meet up with another male, again an unknown, a separate male to that, seen in the vehicle with him at Geelong.
You know, on close inspection there's dark grey pants and he's got black shoes.
Dark grey pants, black shoes and a long black jacket.
AFM.
They were seen to wander around Melbourne together, to sit down and have lunch or a meal, have a number of deep conversations, and then to utilise a public phone box in the city and to make numerous calls from that public phone box.
The phone box.
Yeah, copy that. Mate, if there's a split here, would you be able to put the UI to a car or some sort of transport?
Fortunately, this unidentified individual stayed with Teng. The two had jumped into the van that had been installed with listening devices, and investigators were now privy to their conversations.
They travelled from Melbourne, again down towards Geelong, had a conversation in the vehicle. The second male made comments relating to Teng's involvement in international drug trafficking, and that penalties for the type of activities they were going to be undertaking would in some cases be 20 years and in other cases 5. And this led the AFP to now feel pretty certain that Teng was definitely involved in an imminent importation into Australia of narcotics.
On reaching Geelong, the two males walked along the Cunningham jetty.
Their conversations in that vehicle led us to believe that would be an area where they'd change over the narcotics at a later stage. There were lots of people around, lots of people carrying things, and that they could basically bleed into the background. They noticed a beach marker in the Cunningham jetty area, 57B, and they actually utilised that as a point where they could meet up and do a changeover.
The two men then moved on to Lorne, and the conversation in the car became coded.
In relation to the narcotics, they were calling girlfriends. They were talking about picking up the girlfriends, handing the girlfriends on to others, and at the same time that the girlfriends would be delivered by speedboat.
We knew there was possibly boats involved. We knew there was 150 units, or that was the figure they were talking. Units are a 300-gram block, a 700-gram block. It depends on their particular jargon, the criminals' jargon. If you look at it in terms of the street value, each kilo is $1 million, and that's probably an underestimation. So we knew we were dealing with a minimum of $50 million worth of drugs up to $150 million worth of drugs. And the higher the stakes the criminals are playing with, the more danger, obviously, for everybody involved.
That being the case, we had to make sure that we had an appropriate amount of resources and appropriate level of members available to undertake a safe arrest once we're at the resolution stage.
So what we had to do was just get down there, get all kitted up and be ready for the 100 different situations that could occur. And so it was a case of hurry up and wait. In that case, it's very much like the army. You have to wait and be there at the right time with the right equipment at the right place.
We have to be prepared at all hours of the day to respond at an appropriate level, whether that's 2 in the morning after no sleep or just during a normal business day.
We'd just taken 10-15 minutes break to have something to eat.
Yeah, Roby.
And we received a telephone call that surveillance had lost contact with Mr Teng in the Geelong area, and that one of the possibilities was that Mr Teng was travelling towards Lorne.
All right, we'll keep an eye out. All right, good.
My partner and I decided to position the vehicle at the entrance to Lorne, being that there's only one way into Lorne, and we knew that the vehicle had to travel down that road. Personally, I didn't think they would be travelling back to Lorne because of the time of the evening, unless, of course, something else was going to occur. I remember saying to my partner there that we could be here all night, and the first set of headlights that rolled through Lorne was the silver Tarago.
What would normally take an hour to travel from Geelong to Lorne had taken them only half the time. But they didn't stop at Lorne, and Agent Roby and his partner were in pursuit.
We were the only 2 cars on the road. I was very wary not to be too close to the back of the Tarago, being the only other vehicle on the road. I made inquiries as to how far surveillance were going to be, and I was told that surveillance would probably be another 15 to 20 minutes behind. My partner and I realised at that stage that if anything significant was happening within the next 15 to 20 minutes, then we'd be the 2 members that would be required to do something.
His premonition appeared correct. On the horizon, a boat appeared. A boat that had never been and shouldn't be in Australian waters.
At this stage, Federal Agent Chris Roby and his partner were following the Tarago around the Great Ocean Road at fairly high speeds on an extremely bad night. That being the case, we were quickly trying to have other surveillance members move down into the area to assist Chris Roby.
We'd lost sight of the car for a good 2 or 3 minutes around the bluff, and I remember making that turn around the bluff and seeing quite a large ship, no more than a kilometre off the shore, and it was very, very well illuminated. It certainly was some sort of indicator for this vehicle, I'm certain of that.
Then the van pulled into a parking area above the rugged coastline and in direct sight of the ship.
The occupants of the vehicle were still seated in the vehicle, however their interior light was on, and I could clearly see Mr Teng in the driver's seat. The headlights were still on, which suggests to me that he could have possibly been marking that spot for members on board that ship to travel to that point. Being the only other vehicle on the road, we had no other option at that stage but to continue past the Tarago. There's nowhere to pull over.
So all Agent Roby could do was to make U-turns at certain intervals and drive past the suspects while he waited for backup.
The area along the coastline there is extremely isolated and vehicles stand out, especially at that time of the evening. We were quickly trying to assess where we would be able to locate agents and surveillance members to continue physical surveillance of the suspects if the importation occurred.
But just as reinforcements arrived, the suspects were on the move.
Our two at the front talking.
Surveillance officers followed them to the Grand Pacific Hotel in Lorne. They watched as Teng took a phone call and then headed back alone to the place from where he'd come.
The surveillance operatives noticed a car with its brake lights on, parked to the side of the road, honking its horn. They chose again to drive on by, but noticed that Teng pulled over to meet the other vehicle, which was a blue Ford Focus. They were able to gather a registration, which the command centre quickly checked, and it had been rented to a male by the name of Lamb, confirming that the first unidentified male was now back in the picture. Knowing that the ship was so close to the shoreline and seemingly anchored, we were pretty sure the importation would occur at any stage.
It was going to be a difficult task for the undercover agents to see the handover occur. The beach below where the cars had been parked was hard for them to keep their eye on without being spotted. And the weather that night wasn't doing them any favours.
It was really, really hard to actually see what was going on, both at the vessel and on the beach. You couldn't see the vessel with the naked eye. The only way I was actually able to see it at stage was with the thermal imager. The weather was shocking. There was huge seas, and anybody coming off the boat in those sort of swells must have been crazy, especially given the way that such a large boat was being thrown around. A smaller vessel, if it was coming off that, the boat would have had a real hard time.
Back at the Grand Pacific Hotel, the other male suspect had been nervously puffing on cigarettes for over an hour when Teng arrived back. The two returned to the cliff, and while agents following couldn't stop to see what was happening, the bug in the van was giving them some indication of what had occurred.
Although we couldn't interpret the conversation at the time, something had changed with the situation down the shore party. Very quick, very jumbled conversations.
We were being told that something was going on the beach. I couldn't see that, and I was expecting something to go back from the beach, back towards the ship. That never eventuated.
It was a frustrating moment in the investigation. We had a ship within a kilometre of the shoreline. We had a shore party and two vehicles. However, we couldn't see any handover of the drugs from the ship to the shore party, so it was decided to pull a lot of the members back to Lorne and wait for the narcotics to return with Teng in the Tarago. The Tarago returned to the Lorne Hotel and parked in one of the car parks underneath the hotel, and Teng and Lee were seen to head upstairs to their room. At a point after they went into their room, we had a federal agent go into the car park and look into the back of the Tarago.
It's too big, bud.
In the Tarago, 2 packages could be seen wrapped in blue tarpaulin-type plastic and fishing net. So we were sure that the narcotics had arrived.
We had a lot of options available. We could go and arrest them in the room, but however, that wouldn't show their actual knowledge of the narcotics.
We decided to wait until Teng and his companion returned to their Tarago before arresting them, so that they are in possession of the narcotics at the time of their arrest. The problem was, the packages weren't big enough to be 150 kilograms worth, and we'd now lost contact with the blue Ford Focus.
Lamb, who had gone in a different direction after the handover, had used anti-surveillance techniques, and the police had to drop off his tail.
So we had to try and find that vehicle and find the narcotics.
Not only that, they would need to find forensic evidence that would link the suspects to the scene where the handover had occurred and where the ship that they believed was involved was still anchored. But what they discovered was not what they expected.
Dead person.
It was the dawn of a new day, and the ship that was difficult to see the night before was still anchored off the coast of Lorne. It was now able to be identified as the Pong Su.
We determined very quickly that the Pong Su had been recently registered to Tuvalu, a small nation in the Pacific, but that its previous origins were from North Korea.
The transfer from being a North Korean ship took place less than a month before its arrival.
They'd spent $12,000 changing the registration, and we believe that was to not gain the attention of authorities as the ship moved in and around Australian waters.
However, the Pong Su was detected, and police believed a portion of drugs that was sitting in the van underneath this hotel had come from that ship, and the 2 suspects who had taken possession of those drugs were about to be arrested.
Our plan at that stage was to try and contain them there, to do something to their car that made them stop to repair it, and we came up with letting down the front tyre. They would then start to take off the wheel, and we would cordon and contain them and arrest them peacefully. But things didn't go exactly according to plan, as happens in these situations. He had seen the flat tyre, looked around, definitely saw us sitting there, and he took off at quite a rate of knots. So we had to take this vehicle out as quickly as we could. We blocked it in so it couldn't move anymore, and then members of the SRS and advanced warrant team surrounded the vehicle and at gunpoint extracted the driver and the passenger.
When I arrived at the area, I saw Mr. Teng face down on the road in handcuffs, restrained. And on the passenger side was the accomplice. He was fairly quiet. He didn't seem too ruffled by the situation at all. He certainly didn't seem like someone who was just attempting a large-scale importation for the first time.
He was right. As they discovered, Mr. Chin Kwon Lee had form.
He'd previously escaped from a jail in Denmark where he'd been arrested for drug running in Europe, and he was well known to Interpol and had been involved in drug smuggling in and around Asia and Europe itself.
The boot was opened and there was what appeared to be 40 to 50 kilos of what we presumed was heroin from the nature of all the investigations.
There you go. Merry Christmas.
We knew we'd stopped $40 to $50 million worth of heroin on the street, so there were a lot of very happy federal police at that stage.
It's very waterproof.
The blocks were heavily wrapped in a number of layers of plastic.
This might be your bottom line. And there's another layer there.
Which went to the notion that they had been carried over from the ship. Each was marked with the brand Double UO Globe, a high-quality brand of heroin. And when field tests were done, the contents were confirmed as being just that.
Police have netted Victoria's biggest ever heroin haul, uncovering $60 million worth of the drug at a raid in Lorne. Police seized 40 kilograms of heroin concealed in waterproof bags as it was unloaded from a ship.
While it was a great outcome to arrest 2 of the suspects and locate part of what we believe the importation contained, we still had an outstanding suspect in relation to Lamb and potentially another 100 kilos of heroin somewhere else in the area. We communicated with the Victoria Police and informed all the stations in the area that we were looking for a blue Ford Focus with the registration details we had for Lamb's vehicle. We had to split the members into different groups. Some of the federal agents had to bring back the 2 arrested suspects to Melbourne for interviewing. Other federal agents had to go and set up a crime scene where the importation had occurred so that we could tie any evidence on the beach back to Teng and Lee and the actual vessel that was still offshore at Boggley Creek.
Yeah, I was surprised that it was still there. However, they obviously had a reason to hang around, and we could see that the people around the bridge area were actually looking back to shore with binoculars. So we were starting to wonder whether they were actually looking at us.
Once they were on the beach, they very quickly noticed an inflatable dinghy.
From just looking at the dinghy, it obviously copped a hammering, was deflated. The engine had obviously copped a knock, and it was quite obvious that it wasn't seaworthy. It sort of explained the reason why we never actually saw a boat go back out to the vessel, and possibly explained why the people on the Pong Su were looking into shore.
Nearby, some kelp had taken their interest.
Because there was rocks on top of the kelp, not kelp on top of the rocks, and nature generally dictates that the kelp sits on top of the rocks. Underneath that pile, we found 2 life jackets that had been concealed. So once we knew that the targets were actually burying things under piles of kelp, we started pushing along the beach a bit further and found another pile of kelp with rocks sitting on top of it. Thought this looks pretty good for probably the missing drugs.
Dead person.
I can certainly say that the last thing I expected to find under the seaweed was a dead body. He had a significant head wound. It looked to me as though he had been deliberately placed there and seaweed placed on top of him to conceal the fact that he was there.
We're now in a really serious situation. There was a dead body on the beach. Potentially a murder may have occurred. We weren't sure. We had an amount of narcotics seized in Lorne with 2 suspects and another suspect outstanding, being Lamb, who still may have the narcotics.
With the discovery of the 2 life jackets, police believed there was another suspect somewhere. But as they contemplated whether he was dead or alive, the Pong Su took off.
We had a belief that the Pong Su was a vessel involved in the dropping off of the narcotics. We also had a belief that the deceased male may well have been a crew member. We needed to get that vessel into an Australian port so we could have a thorough physical examination of the vessel and treat that vessel as a crime scene as well.
Yes, Pong Su, here is Police Launch Fearless. You are directed to turn your ship about. Over. Tell your captain that failing to obey this direction immediately, he is disobeying a direction under Australian customs law. Over. Pong Su, here is Police Launch Fearless. Under the Australian Customs Act, you are hereby directed to alter course and make directly for Eden Port. Over.
Mr. Pong Su, we are having breakfast with a moment.
And Pong Su, you are to alter course immediately for Eden Port. You are heading on a course that is not appropriate. Over.
As Australian Federal Police continued to urge the Pong Su into port, Victorian police divers had been brought into the investigation.
There was some suggestion that there may have been a second person who had come ashore and had not been located because there were 2 life jackets and that it was more than probable that that person was deceased because they'd only found the body of one person buried under some seaweed there earlier on that day.
An autopsy of the dead man confirmed he had not been murdered, but had hit his head, probably when the dinghy capsized, and drowned. And with the swell still as dangerous as the night before, the dive to see whether there was another body was postponed.
So whilst we were waiting for the seas to abate and the tide to go out, we started to search the sand and the beached area And whilst we walked along the beach, we found a running shoe that had been washed up in a rock, and it had a paint substance on the sole. We also found a blue plastic bag, and that bag had a tear in the side of it, which led us to believe that there may have been something in it that had since been removed. Whether it had been torn on the rocks or whether somebody had actually cut it, we were unable to determine at that time.
Above the area of the beach and just near to where the suspects' cars had been parked the night before, another officer had been searching for evidence.
I made my way up to him. We moved through the bush, and about 7 metres from our location, we found a guy laying on the ground.
He was laying in a...
Not on him, mate, just be right. Yep, thanks.
Like this.
Yep.
Here, we had a water bottle, half consumed, just there.
Yep.
We had a brown paper bag, just over here.
Okay.
When we searched his bag, we found a set of binoculars, we found a torch, we found a phone, some SIM cards, and we found a GPS.
The arrested man gave his name as Ta Song Wong, and while police suspected he was a crew member of the Pong Su and was directly involved in the handover of the drugs, they needed forensics to prove it.
Wong was using a piece of black rubber to hold his pants up, similar to the rubber used to package the narcotics that had been intercepted in Teng's Tarago.
These strips of black rubber, like you'd get off the inner tube of a car, had been sliced into strips and just tied around to the bags to keep them shut. When something has been cut with a knife, you end up with what are called striated marks on the edges of the rubber, and they can literally be lined up like a jigsaw puzzle.
And when Wong's makeshift belt was lined up with the ties from the heroin package, they were a perfect fit.
We could certainly show that they had once been one piece before they were cut.
The forensics investigation then moved on to actual fingerprinting. It was determined that both Wong and the dead man found on the shore's fingerprints were discovered inside the packaging of the narcotics themselves, inside the heroin boxes. The actual links of the rubber banding and Wong's fingerprints proved that Wong had some involvement in pre-packaging the heroin before it left the Pong Su itself, and that Wong had come from the ship on the dinghy the night before to deliver the narcotics to the shore party. And we also believe Wong was waiting in the observation post or the hide for the ship to come back and rescue him from the shore. The dinghy had capsized the night before and he had no other way of getting back to the ship. However, after the Pong Su became aware of the police activities on the shore, they then made their escape into the Australian waters.
Yeah, you are directed under Australian customs laws to return to the Port of Eden, steering a course of 270 for the purpose of boarding.
Our task was to board that ship because we suspected there was more narcotics on board, and if there wasn't narcotics, there was certainly those people involved in importing a large amount of narcotics.
Pong Su, stop your vessel. I repeat, stop your vessel.
Now, tactical training to get aboard a ship, when it's stable is one thing, but when it's moving is entirely another. We'd already lost one person in this operation. It was a suspect, but I certainly didn't want to lose any police members, so at that stage, whilst we'd sent one rubber dinghy out, I called them back in and said no, because the members were fully equipped with their ballistic vests and their helmets and all of their other equipment, which is quite heavy, and if one were to go overboard, no matter how good a swimmer they'd be, they'd go straight to the bottom.
As their options were considered, agents on dry land were concentrating on finding Lam, the member of the shore party who had so far evaded detection.
We had to remember we still had a meeting point that had been set up prior to the importation in the Geelong-Cunningham Pier area at that beach marker 57B. So we had surveillance monitoring that area the whole time.
Lam did turn up and parked right next to the 57B sign and a BMW.
Lam was seen to depart the vehicle and start brushing sand out of the boot area. At the same time, he was seen to have a conversation with the person from the BMW. Agents believed this other person could be involved in the actual importation as potentially another syndicate member who was there to pick up the narcotics from the night before.
Although it appeared nothing had been handed over, the police weren't taking any chances.
A decision was made to intercept the BMW to try and identify the person in the vehicle, but it was quickly determined that the person was just a member of the public and had no involvement in the actual investigation we were carrying out.
Not long after the BMW left, Lamb was on his way.
We couldn't afford to let Lamb get back to Melbourne and lose him again in a larger area. That's why the decision was made to intercept him at that stage so we could maintain control of him and the location of the narcotics. However, after searching his vehicle, we quickly discovered there were no drugs secreted in the car at all.
The fact that Lamb had brushed sand from his car gave police hope that the drugs hadn't hit the streets of Melbourne and were hidden somewhere nearby. And in order to find them, they would literally need to turn to the heavens for help. While the AFP had arrested 4 men over the importation of 50 kilos of narcotics, they still believed up to 100 kilos of heroin was outstanding. They hoped that the GPS that was found on Wong might lead them to it.
A global positioning system will display in coordinates on your device whereabouts on the world's surface you are. So it's all to do with distance, time, and signals that are sent from at least 4 satellites to the device that you're using to receive that data. And it has an onboard memory, and when we downloaded the information from the GPS that was found on Wong, we found that there were 3,000 separate pieces of information contained on the memory within that device.
However, it was quite apparent that Wong hadn't brought the GPS to the area because it had plotted a number of points in and around the coastal area of Lorne and Geelong for some time prior to the Pong Su arriving.
In the period after the ship arrived and after the handover occurred, the coordinates for the GPS were in one place only, the place that Wong had been found. And in that area, the missing heroin had not been located.
We believed he'd been handed the GPS by one of the shore party when they discovered he couldn't get back to the ship.
But it was the activity on the GPS before the ship arrived that was being scrutinised. Not only did the data marry up to all the places that the 3 suspects had been seen, but there was one spot, 40 kilometres away from the drop-off zone, that had been visited numerous times.
And it was in the middle of nowhere. It was on the side of a road, and it really warranted a second look.
The last known visit to the area was half an hour before the handover occurred. At that time, Teng and Lee were under surveillance, so the person holding the GPS was more than likely to be Lamb, and police wondered whether he may have returned to the site with heroin in hand.
And as we approached the point, I was just reading off the GPS and it said 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. It said we're here. And I looked down on the ground. I picked up a plastic bag, and contained within that plastic bag was 2 photographs of Lamb.
While no heroin was discovered in this area, other vital evidence had been. There was a mobile phone starter kit with Lamb's fingerprint upon it.
Most importantly, there was an A4 sheet of paper that was a shipping invoice for the Pong Su. This was significant because Mr. Lamb had indicated that he was not involved in this incident at all, and we'd now found physical evidence that linked Lamb to the Pong Su, which was currently heading up the coast towards Sydney.
Pong Su, stop your vessel now!
You have been told and warned numerous times. Are you altering course back to Eden Port, over? No, he's making a run for it.
Pong Su, if you do not stop your vessel or alter course, we will stop your vessel, or the Australian government will stop your vessel using any method available.
We were tasked to follow the ship and to cover it. Meantime, the people back in headquarters were getting the people most skilled and best equipped to do the actual takeout of the vessel.
Motor vessel Pong Su, this is Australian warship. Rig your pilot ladder starboard side now.
You know, at the present now, my crew members now sleeping now, so waiting some moment.
No, sir. Please wake them up. I intend to board you. Over.
The HMAS Stewart was sent from Sydney to intercept the Pong Su. Once it made contact with the Pong Su, it sent a helicopter where SAS soldiers boarded the ship and made it safe for the AFP to go on board. It now became another crime scene for us to search, to try and link the evidence on board the Pong Su with the rest of the evidence we had seized during the investigation.
Okay, the time is 11:52 on Sunday the 20th of April 2003.
A thorough search of the ship showed us that it was most probably a smuggling ship for the purpose of actually moving narcotics in and around the world. Water tanks on the ship had been converted to fuel tanks, basically giving the ship a greater capacity to travel without stopping to take on fuel. A huge amount of food had been found on the ship, also allowing the crew to survive for some time without going to port. The reason for this would be obvious. By not having to go to port, especially in Australia, they wouldn't come to the attention of authorities that may be wanting to check the ship.
A systematic search began this morning. Every room, cupboard and panel. Specialised X-ray and chemical equipment taken aboard. Even the ship's filter and vents were checked.
We were given a running shoe from the beach near the dead body, which had a number of paint stains on it, and we were asked if there was any possibility that we could match paint from the shoe with any paint found on the Pong Su.
Paint samples and scrapings from the deck of the ship were analysed and compared.
We were able to match a number of features of the paint, not conclusively, not 100%, but very, very likely that the paint on the shoe was the same as found on the deck of the Pong Su.
When the dead person was found, he wasn't wearing shoes.
So the links between the dead man, Wong, the ship and the shore party continued to grow.
But we still had the problem of the missing narcotics that we believe Mr. Lamb was in possession of at some stage.
We had to find it. It was imperative that that drug be discovered before someone else got their hands on it. The night the drugs came ashore and were handed over to the shore party, Teng and Lee headed back to Lawn to their hotel. Lamb had headed in the opposite direction. Our surveillance operative attempted to follow Lamb, however he was using what's known as anti-surveillance measures.
As a result, the agents dropped off Lamb, but they knew the direction he had travelled. Now an extensive search along a 25-kilometre stretch of road and bushland was being undertaken.
It took a few days, but eventually we won. We found the drugs in a small trench covered in leaves and other trees. It was obvious that these were the narcotics that originally came ashore with the Pong Su. They had the same wrapping, the same blue tarpaulin, the fish nets, and the black rubber banding to hold it all together.
To see those drugs we found and seized was pretty gratifying. It was very, very satisfying to take possession of it and take it out of circulation.
The raid on board the Pong Su followed the seizure of 50 kilograms of heroin off Victoria's southwest coast. Another 75 kilograms of the drug was discovered hidden in bushes, a total street value of $164 million. The ship's captain, chief mate and chief engineer were today ordered to stand trial after a magistrate found they were in a position to assist in the drug run. A crew member who allegedly brought the heroin to shore and 3 others accused of collecting it will also stand trial.
Teng, Lee and Lamb all pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting the importation of a commercial quantity of heroin. Ta Song Wong pleaded guilty to its importation. But a jury found the captain and his 2 senior staff not guilty.
Regardless of who surrounding that narcotic importation is convicted, at the end of the day you have to be happy with the fact that we achieved what we wanted to achieve, and that was to stop the narcotics reaching the community.
If you look at the figures in 1999 of how many people a year were dying from heroin, it was up to about 1,200 people a year. And now it's back down to around 300 people a year. So we have made a difference.
The 4,000-tonne vessel was towed out to sea about 140 kilometres off the New South Wales south coast. An F-111 jet fighter lined up the vessel and bombed it.
That syndicate won't be doing that again. That ship won't be doing it again. It's at the bottom of the ocean. So the results were very good. I think it did send a very strong message right around the world that Australia won't put up with this.